Stop plucker. Chapter 2. In a giant, empty, decaying building which had once housed thousands, a single TV set hawked its wares to an uninhabited room. This ownerless ruin had, before World War terminus, been tended and maintained. Here had been the suburbs of San Francisco, a short ride by monorail, rapid transit. The entire peninsula had chattered like a bird tree with life and opinions and complaints. And now the watchful owners had either died or migrated to a colony world, mostly the former. It had been a costly war despite the valiant predictions of the Pentagon and its smug scientific vassal, the Rand Corporation, which had in fact existed not far from the spot. Like the apartment owners, the corporation had departed, evidently for good. No one missed it. In addition, no one today remembered why the war had come about or who, if anyone, had won. The dust which had contained most of the planet's surface had originated in no country, and no one, even the wartime enemy, had planned on it. First, strangely, the owls had died. At the time, it seemed almost funny. The fat, fluffy white birds laying here and there in yards and on streets, coming out no earlier than twilight as they had while alive. The owls escaped notice. Medieval plagues had manifested themselves in a similar way, in the form of many dead rats. This plague, however, had descended from above. After the owls, of course, the other birds followed. But then the mystery had been grasped and understood. A meager colonization program had been underway before the war, but now that the sun had ceased to shine on Earth, the colonization entered an entirely new phase. In connection with this, a weapon of war, the synthetic freedom fighter, had been modified, able to function on an alien world. The humanoid robot, strictly speaking, the organic android, had become the mobile donkey engine of the colonization program. Under UN law, each emigrated automatically received possession of an android subtype of his choice, and by 2019, the variety of subtypes passed all understanding in the manner of American automobiles in the 1960s. That had been the ultimate incentive of immigration, the android servant as a carrot, the radioactive fallout as stick. The UN had made it easy to emigrate, difficult if not impossible to stay. Lording on Earth potentially meant finding oneself abruptly classified as biologically unacceptable, a menace to the pristine heredity of the race. Once pegged as specialists, and even if accepting sterilization dropped out of history, he ceased in fact to be part of mankind, and yet persons here and there declined to migrate, that even those involved constituted perplexing, irrational, logically even regular should have emigrated already. Perhaps, deformed as it was, Earth remained familiar to be clung to, or possibly the non-immigrant imagined that the tent of dust would deplete itself finally. In any case, thousands of individuals remained, most of them consolated in the urban areas where they could physically see one another, take heart at their mutual presence. Those appeared to be the relatively sane ones, and in dubious addition to them, occasional peculiar entities remained in the virtually abandoned suburbs. John Isidore, being yammered at by television set in his living room as he shaved in the bathroom, was one of these. He simply had wandered to the spot in the early days following the war. In those evil times, no one had known really what they were doing. Populations detached by the war had roamed squatted temporarily at first one region and then another. Back then the fallout had been sporadic and highly variable. Some states had been nearly free of it, others became saturated. The displaced populations moved as the dust moved. The peninsula south of San Francisco had been at first dust-free, and a great body of persons had responded by taking up residence there. Where the dust arrived, some had died, and the rest had departed. J.R. Isidore remained. The TV set shouted duplicates, the halcyon days, the priests of a war of southern states, either as body servants of tireless field hands, the custom-tailored humanoid robot designed specifically for your unique needs, for you and you alone. Given to you on your arrival absolutely free, equipped fully as specified by you before your departure from Earth. This loyal, trouble-free companion in the greatest, boldest adventure contrived by man in modern history will provide. It continued on and on. I wonder if I'm late for work, Isidore wondered as he scraped. He did not own a working clock. Generally, he depended on the TV for time signals. But today was Interspace Horizons Day. Evidently, anyhow, the TV claimed this to be the 5th or 6th anniversary of the founding of New America and chief U.S. settlement on Mars, and his TV set being partly broken, picked up only the channel which had been nationalized during the war and still remains so. The government in Washington, with its colonization program, constituted the sole sponsor which Isidore found himself forced to listen to. Let's hear from Mrs. Maggie Cluman, the TV announcer suggested to John Isidore, who only know the time. Recent immigrant to Mars, Mrs. Klugen, in an interview taped live in New York, had this to say. Mrs. Klugen, would you contrast your life back on contaminated Earth with your new life here in a new world rich with unimaginable possibilities? A pause, and then a tired, dry, middle-aged female voice said, I think what I and my family of three noticed most was the dignity. The dignity, Mrs. Klugman. The answer said, yes, Mrs. Klugman. Now of New York, Mars said, it's a hard thing to explain having a servant who can depend on these troubled times. I find it reassuring. Back on Earth, Mrs. Klugman, in the old days, did you not also worry about finding yourself classified him as a special? Oh, my husband and myself worried ourselves nearly to death. Of course, once we emigrated, that worry vanished, fortunately, forever. To himself, John Isidore thought acidly, it's gone away for me too. Without my having to emigrate, he had been a special now for over a year, and not merely in regard to the distorted genes in which he carried. Worse still, he had failed to pass the minimum mental faculties test, which made him popular parlance a chickenhead. Upon him the contempt of three planets descended. However, despite this, he survived. He had his job driving a pickup and delivery truck for a false animal repair firm, the Van Ness Pet Hospital, and his gloomy Gothic boss, Hanwell Sloat, accepted him as a human, and this he appreciated. More certa vita incerta, as Mr. Sloat occasionally declared. Isidore, though he had heard the expression a number of times, retained only a dim notion as to its meaning. After all, if a chicken head could fathom Latin, he would cease to be a chicken head. Mr. Sloat, when this was pointed out to him, acknowledged its truth, and there existed chicken heads infinitely stupider than Isidore, who could hold no jobs at all, who remained in custodial institutions quaintly called Institute of Special Trade Skills of America. The word special having to get in there somehow, or as always. Your husband felt no protection, the TV announcer was saying, and owning and continually wearing an expensive, clumsy, radiation-proof lead codpiece. Mrs. Klugman. My husband, Mrs. Klugman began, but at that point, having finished shaving, Isidore strode in the living room and shut off the TV. Silence that flashed from the woodwork and the walls. It smote him with an awful total power as it generated by a vast mill. It rose from the floor up on tattered gray wall-to-wall carpeting, and unleashed itself from the broken and semi-broken appliances in the kitchen. The dead machines hadn't worked in all this time Isidore had lived there, and the useless pole lamp in the living room had oozed out, meshing with the empty, worldless descent of itself on the fly-speckled ceiling. It managed to in fact emerge from every object within his range of vision, as if the silence meant to be something all things tangible. Hence it assailed not only his ears, but his eyes. As he stood by the inert TV set, he experienced the silence as visible in its own way, alive. Alive he had often felt its austere approach, before when it came, bursting without, subtle, evidently unable to wait. The silence of the world could not rein back its greed, not any longer, not when it had virtually won. He wondered then if the others who had remained on Earth experienced the void this way, or was it his peculiar biological entity, a freak generated by his inept sensory apparatus. Interesting question, Isidore thought, but whom could he compare notes with? He lived alone in this deteriorating building, a blind building of 1,000 uninhabited apartments, which, like all of its counterparts, fell day by day in a greater entropic ruin. Eventually, everything within the building would merge, would be faceless and identical, mere pudding-like kipple piled to the ceiling of each apartment. And after that, the uncared-for building itself would settle into shapelessness, buried